I'm not gonna lie, there are times when I'm jealous of movie critics. When they sit down to watch a film, not only do they know how long it's gonna be, but they also never have to worry about the movie working. Those are not things that I can take for granted as a game critic, which is something that I was reminded of this week when I tried to play through the Fabled Woods from first-time developer CyberPunch Studios. What should have been a short and sweet first-person narrative thriller turned into a long process of just trying to get the game to work properly. In fact, when all was said and done, it ended up taking me 3 times as long to get the game running as it did to play through the damn thing. Yeah, I bet that's not a problem that Siskel and Ebert had to deal with. From the moment we step foot in the Fabled Woods, it's obvious that this is not going to be one of those relaxing strolls through the forest. The sun is out, the birds are chirping, and you can almost feel the wind as it blows through the trees, yet something is definitely off. Our first sign of this is an empty campsite near the lake, which appears to be freshly abandoned. This is made all the more urgent when you notice the blood on the tent and those unnatural markings leading down to the nearby creek. Clearly, something bad happened here. But what? The answer to that question lies in our short but eventful trek through these fabled woods. This is the kind of first-person narrative game where you spend a lot of time listening to other characters talk at you. We're first introduced to Larry, an old man who is tormented by the tragic death of a loved one. Sarah, on the other hand, is an investigator on the hunt for evidence that could solve an important case. Much like Larry, she too is haunted by something that happened in this forest. These stories, as well as one about a scientist named Todd, help us fill in the blanks and answer all of those questions that you might have had back at the campsite. Now, I know there are a lot of people who dismiss this story-based genre out of hand and disparagingly call them walking simulators. I can respect that and even understand where those people are coming from, but I've always enjoyed these narrative games. Look, I'm a sucker for a compelling story, especially when it's a crime thriller or supernatural horror. And at the start of the Fabled Woods, it looked like it was going to check off a lot of those boxes. However, as I adventured deeper into the forest, I found myself thoroughly underwhelmed at every single turn. A lot of the problems can be placed right at the feet of the structure, which is repetitious to a fault. There really aren't any puzzles to solve here, so you're mostly just looking around for an item or a weapon that will advance the story. Once you've found the proper clue, you'll be whisked away to a weird dimension where you follow a narrow path while everything else is floating in thin air. Once you reach the end of that path, you'll go right back to the forest where we'll look for the next item, where you'll once again go back to that hellish dimension. This back and forth is how the game goes right up to the very end. And speaking of which, the game's 2 endings couldn't possibly be more anticlimactic. In fact, the entire third act of the game had me rolling my eyes. It's not just the fact that the story is in a massive hurry to end, but also that the conclusion is so painfully obvious that you'll be able to guess the big twist within the opening seconds. What's worse is the game ultimately has nothing to say. It's a retread of a lot of familiar horror and thriller tropes, none of which are particularly interesting or handled well here. We get a very straightforward story that is so paper thin that it barely has enough momentum to fill up the 30-minute long runtime. There's also the more troubling part of the Fabled Woods, which is that the game barely works. I instantly had 2 game-breaking problems that made it impossible to play through the earliest parts of the story. The first was right after the campsite that we talked about earlier, where I couldn't even cross a bridge without hitting this invisible wall. At first, I just assumed that this was because I was missing part of the story or needed to find the right item or something. But no, the game was just putting up an invisible wall to prevent me from getting to the next part of the journey. The second game-breaking bug came when I decided to start over. Now, you would think that I would have no problem getting back to where I was since I had already investigated the campsite and knew exactly what I was looking for. Smooth sailing, right? Wrong. I couldn't even find the first item to collect because it failed to spawn in the world. I tried starting over, loading saved games, fiddling with the settings, and anything else I could think of. But the one thing that I needed to advance the story never showed up. Once again, I was stuck. Thankfully, after an hour and a half of getting nowhere, I ended up uninstalling the game and then re-downloading it. This worked, and it allowed me to play through the whole game in a single sitting. It took me 90 minutes of fighting with the game in order to play through a 30-minute story. Not cool! I would also point out that the game is poorly optimized. No matter what settings you choose, the game never runs as smoothly as you would want. The animation sputters around and the textures annoyingly pop up, which really takes away what promises to be a beautiful game. Then again, this is pretty low on my list of complaints about the Fabled Woods. Compared to the lackluster plot and game-breaking bugs, I can put up with unstable frame rates and a few ugly textures. Hell, if the story's compelling enough, I've been known to put up with a whole lot more. But with a twist you see coming a mile away and questionable voice acting, I have a hunch that the only thing I'm going to be remembering about the trek through this forest will be the frustrating technical problems and laughably unsatisfying endings. The Fabled Woods is a 30-minute adventure that took me 2 hours to play. Not because it's hard or filled with brain-busting puzzles, but rather due to a number of frustrating technical problems that left me running in circles. From the story, to the setting, to the painfully obvious twist at the end, this is a first-person narrative game that trips over every rock and branch in the forest. Even if it wasn't packed full of game-breaking bugs, the Fabled Woods would still be worth skipping for the hackneyed storytelling and depressingly short runtime. Yeah, I have a hunch that this fable is gonna be instantly forgotten. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now here's the question I have for you. What game has a great or terrible twist? You can really go either way with this one. Or maybe there's a twist you think that is both great and terrible. Totally your call. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, I'm up to my eyeballs in games to review, including the new Record of Lotus War game, Where's Samantha, Genesis Noir, and something called Eggcelerate in time for Easter. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.